monologues, Dean McClung. What do you think of my new theme song? Oh, yeah. I believe it's called... Well, I believe it's called... I named it. I should know what it's called, right? All right, we'll just let that go. I want to talk about words. And something else, but I'll get to that later. Words mean what they mean. Now, you might be saying to yourself, yeah, duh. However, most people is a good way to characterize it. Most people. They just assume that a word means what it means based, depending on who's telling you what the word means. For example, if you think a word means something, and the consensus is that the word means something else, and then again somebody else thinks that the word means exactly what the word means according to the dictionary, or depending on exactly what the word means as a result of the word being, say, created from another word in a different language. For example, Latin. So let's say that a word that we use today in America, for example, in common usage today, a word like child or person or equal. Oh yeah, and the word pedophile. We assume we know what the word means because of its usage in common language and common conversation in the society we live in at the present time. We don't consider particularly what the word means or meant like 200 or 300 years ago, before America and its laws and fabrications and making things up out of thin air and so on. The word child derives from, say, like Old English, for example, or sometimes a word you go to the dictionary and you see the origin of the word, and so they can even, like dictionary.com will give you an approximation of when the word actually came into existence and became a part of common language. It'll say like, oh, this word was invented one way or another around the years, like say the 900s. Or around 1410. And the word derives from, say, a Latin word, which was used by Latin-speaking people at some point. In this case, perhaps 1400s, 1410, approximately. Now, I can't tell you what the Latin word for child is. I didn't look it up for the purposes of this particular program, but it's available. It's on the internet. You can look it up. Look at a dictionary. It'll tell you. That's not the point of what I'm saying here. What I'm saying to you is that they've taken the word child, they being the bad guys, the mind benders, the evil bastards that are controlling and manipulating language. And I'm speaking of here basically of America. I assume criminal manipulations of the language goes on in every country to some degree. I'm not interested in what a Chinese person says in China. In this case, this particular conversation I'm having, or a monologue that I'm having with you now, is centered around a society that I know and live in and have for my entire life. So the word child means what it means. Its original meaning. And there's a lot, here's something, a phrase that you may have not heard of, or may have not heard lately. It's original intent, meaning the original intention of the person or people or society that invented a word, like child, which came about as a result of, I'm sure the word child is not something that never existed. As long as there's been language of some kind somewhere on the planet, those people more than likely have a word equal to the word child. In other words, some guy living in the 1400s in, say, some part of Europe, they were alive, they were living, they were involved in living their lives, and they had an offspring. Their union, man and a woman got together and had sex and produced a baby. And that baby, plops out, and there it is. Ta-da! We'll call him George. That's a child. That couple has a child, an offspring, the product of their sexual union, the biological function of having sex and producing a child, offspring, infant, boy or girl. So that's a definition of the word child. An offspring of parents. And we often hear that word child used in relationship or in relevance to that purpose in that situation. I have a child because, I produced a child with a woman. I didn't do it myself. A woman that I was having sex with, and whether I'm married to that person or not is irrelevant. I was married. And marriage is another word that's been screwed up, that I won't get into that at this point. So the word child means the offspring of parents. And we're talking human beings, pretty much. A child of any creature, animal, mammal, what have you. Applies. If there are other words, for example, spawn, which, some people get a kind of cool chill up their spine whenever they hear the word, that word, because spawn kind of, if you read any and much in your life, you probably run across the devil's spawn, the phrase, which is simply saying the devil had some children. Well, it's fairy tale stuff there. We won't get into that. But your child is your offspring, a human being that you produced by having sex. Men and women together having sex, sexual intercourse. Bzzt, spit the sperm in the womb thingy and the vagina in the womb, and it gets on with an ovum and they connect and it becomes a child. Eventually. After it's born and it's there breathing and saying, wah, wah, feed me. The problem is that people think that child means child in that sense, and sometimes they don't distinguish between child meaning offspring of a parent or parents, and they get that confused with another application of the word, which is, let's say, the biological meaning of the word, aside from being an offspring. Let's say we're talking about a young person of, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years of age. And I'm trying to think of a sentence that would take us away from the offspring's product of a sexual relationship with two people. I have a child who is not my spawn directly, not an offspring of mine, but an offspring of someone else. And I'm talking about that person, the child of another person. For example, my neighbor. And I'm having a conversation and we're talking about my neighbor, how that comes up in conversation. It could be for whatever reason. So I said, okay, my neighbor has a child. And that child is 6, 7 years old. Now, if you're trying to determine what I just said, my neighbor has a child, what picture comes to your mind? What image do you have? What do you think that I meant when I said that? All right. Now, just to be clear, if the stuttering here, if you just automatically think, oh, a child, your neighbor has a child, and that means a human being under the age of 18. If that's what you thought, if that's what your conclusion is, if that's what your brain told you to think, and you should, and maybe you come out in a conversation and you actually say that out loud. Oh, your neighbor has a child. That means your neighbor has, as a part of the family, as a part of their construct as a family, they have a person that they produced, offspring, that's under the age of 18. If that's what you thought, then you would be wrong. Because number one, I'm not talking about a 17-year-old. I'm not talking about a 15-year-old. I'm talking about a 6-year-old. So, the meaning of the word is important here. You are assuming that I used the word child in the context of a legal term. I'll get to that in a minute. A legal term, which is a fabricated, arbitrary term that the government or the lawmaker invented just out of thin air. Has nothing to do with real meaning of a word. So if I say my neighbor has a child, if you assume that I mean somebody under the age of 18, you would be wrong, because I'm not talking about a minor. I'm not talking about the legal definition of the word child. I'm talking about the actual human development, the stage of development of that human being that lives with my neighbor, that he produced with his wife, and so on. So I'm talking about the biological definition, which applies in any time you're discussing society or the construct of family, etc., people. The definition of child in that case would be a human being who is prepubescent. That is to say, not yet a teenager or adolescent. By the way, teenager is a slang term. It's not a legal term. It's not a biological term. It is a slang term. It's sort of like saying, "Hey man, that's cool," which is slang. The word cool was given a different definition than the one you would find in the dictionary. Although it's possible you might find a word in the dictionary, you might find a word cool in the dictionary that gives you the slang definition of the word, which is fine, as long as it's labeled as slang. A lot of times you'll look in the dictionary, and I'm referring here to dictionary.com as an example. You look in dictionary.com and you may not see the definition of child in the slang sense. It will just simply give you a definition, meaning cool. Cool, for example, in dictionary.com might say, I haven't looked it up, so I don't know. But it might say, without using any indication or any word to describe it as slang, it'd simply say, very awesome, or nice, or pleasant, or whatever. So, the point is, my neighbor's child, the child living next door to me, that doesn't mean that that's a person under 18. That's a legal term, like I said, and it is totally irrelevant to what the meaning of the word is in reality. The word child, biologically and in practical application, aside from it being an offspring of a parent, would be a human being under the age of, let's say, 12. Now, 12 is sort of arbitrary because puberty sets in at different ages. Take the average. Take the average onset of puberty. Could be anywhere from 9 to 12. So I'm using arbitrary numbers to describe that stage in the transition from child into adolescent, which is puberty. That's what it means. Puberty is the transitional stage of development of a human being from child to adolescent. So, when I hear the word child, and it is put into context, for example, if I'm talking about my child, that is to say my offspring, the product of me and a woman, say my wife, having sexual intercourse, and she got pregnant, and bingo, she had a baby, which is our child. That application is set. That is true. However, if I'm talking about a child in relationship to or in context of the human development stage of that human being, then to call that person a child, the definition is a human being under the age of puberty. That child has not began the transition into an adolescent. Now, universally accepted has been, and of course, by context of like the entire history of humanity, that stage is universally accepted, consensus-wise, throughout history of humanity, as about the age of 12 or so, give or take. Well, it seems like many people, and particularly the government, has decided to totally ignore the entire history of humanity and come up with a definition for the word child that has nothing to do with that history. They just fabricated something, made it up out of thin air and said, bam, that's what the definition of the word child is from now on, in regards to, say, the context of a law. Laws are fabricated. Unless you're talking about the laws of nature, which are naturally existing. You know, like the laws of gravity. So when we use the word law, it also has context. The use of the word law in the laws of nature are not the same as the laws of human beings, such as what might be passed by Congress. So the word laws has contextual meaning that's different in the application. If you're talking about laws, that's one thing. If you're talking about the laws of man as opposed to the laws of nature, two different meanings. Two different meanings because there's two different concepts or two different contexts that the word is used in. So if you're using the word child in regards to the law, we go to the law and the definition given in the law. That doesn't mean that the definition given by the law or by the government in making the law, that definition is the accurate definition or the true meaning of the word. It is simply meaningful only in the context of the law, whereby the definition of the word child is defined by the government. Not by language history, not by social history or cultural context, but simply made it up to apply simply to the law. It means what it means according to the law. Okay, so I gave you another word, and I'll explain. For example, in the law, in American law, U.S. codes and so on, statutes, the word child, I was going to use another word, person, for example. In the word person, let's talk about the income tax and taxation in general in regards to the laws in America. And I will quote you now. I will quote, for the purposes of the income tax, and only the income tax, by the way, for the purposes of the income tax, the word person means a corporation, end quote. What that means is what it says. It means exactly what it says. For the purposes of the income tax, the word person means a corporation. So anytime you hear the word person in regards to the income tax or laws regarding the income tax, what the law actually is saying and what the law actually means is that a person is a corporation. Your dictionary definition is irrelevant. It is not the common definition of the word as we would find in a dictionary or as we would use the word in our common language outside of the context of the income tax. The word is defined in the law, which is required, by the way. If the government makes a law and they're going to use words and give a different meaning to that word than the common meaning or the dictionary meaning of the word, they have to define it in the law. That's a rule. Because otherwise you just got gibberish. So the word person in regards to income tax means a corporation. So anytime the law uses the word person or and I'll give you an example. For example, if trying to think of a law and the wording of a law. Okay, it says I'll just make up something. I'm not going to quote the law itself. I'll just make up something that is exemplary of what I'm saying. In the tax laws, you find the phrase U.S. person or United States person. What does that mean? We already know that the word person means a corporation. So whenever you read in the tax law, it says a United States person. It means United States corporation. Because we've already been given the definition of the word person. And we know that every time the word person is used, they're actually saying, the government in the law is actually saying corporation. So a U.S. person is a U.S. corporation. It's the law. It's the way the law works. It's what it means. It's the way it is applied, and that's how it functions in law. So every time you hear the word person in the tax laws of the United States, they're saying corporation. They're just, instead of just saying corporation, which would have been the simplest thing to do, they changed the corporation to mean a person, and vice versa. So that's an example of how the government screws with the frickin' language, and mind benders twist things around to suit their own purposes, which in the case of the income tax is for devious criminal purposes, deceptive, fraudulent purposes. We're trying to confuse people because we want everybody to think that we're using the word person like a human being, but we're not. But we're not going to tell them that. Oh, yeah, but they did, because it says so in the law. We're going to change the meaning of the word person for our purposes. And you're just going to have to pay attention, or you'll just not get it. Same thing with the word child. When you define the word child to mean a minor, you have to say that in the law. If the word child is defined as a minor in a law, the law has to state that that's what you've done. We're going to change the meaning of the word child for the purposes of this law, which in this case is Title 18. We're going to define the word child as minor, meaning someone under 18. Which is arbitrary, because you can change the meaning of the word minor to mean any number you want. The government can just say, oh, and a minor is defined as a person under the age of 18, or they could just change the definition of the word minor to mean a person under the age of 16, or under the age of 28, whatever number they want to apply to it. Because the government can do whatever it wants, even if it's wrong. So, the American people, motorcycles, or something. All right. If you hear the word child in relationship to, in the context of the law, Title 18, or as a legal term, the legal term child means a minor, a person under 18. That is not a scientific, biological, factual definition. That is a fabricated, arbitrary definition made up by the government or made up by the lawmakers. So outside the context of Title 18, the word child means an offspring. Your child, your baby, your children, in the sense of your spawn, as it were. If you have children, let's say you've got a wife and a husband, and you got together, and you say, let's have some babies, and you got together, and you had some sex, and the baby, and she got pregnant, pops out a baby, you got a baby, and it's a child. It's your child. Meaning it's your offspring, your spawn, your prodigy. Totally different context, totally different meaning. Except when you call a child your child, that's the right meaning of the word. That is the actual definition of the word. Child is your offspring, or a human being under the age of puberty, or prepubescent. Or, if you want to add a number to it, under 12. Because that's universally consensus. The puberty begins somewhere in the age of 12. I know the younger. Puberty is setting in younger and younger these days for reasons I don't know and I'm not going to get into. Some sort of evolutionary process, apparently. So you see what I'm saying? The word child can mean 2 or 3, 4 different things. I'll just throw this one in. I invented something, and I've been working on this project to make a thing, invent a thing. Let's say I'm designing a new toaster. I'm designing a new way to toast toast, or to make toast out of bread. And I'm going to call it Toast-O-Matic. I'm going to call this this project is my baby. This project that I'm working on to make this new kind of toaster is my child. My invention. So that's another context of the word child, or application of the word child. So it doesn't have to be a human being. However, when the American people allow themselves to be duped and manipulated and brainwashed, conditioned by these mind benders, these evil monsters, people start saying, oh, a child is under 18, a child is under 18. And that's, well, in the context of the legal term, yeah. But it's the wrong definition because it doesn't have anything to do with the word child. In other words, if you're going to make a law and you're going to use the term minor, then just say minor and then define what a minor is. In this case, present day being a human being under the age of 18. Why not just say that? Why not just use the clear, precise language that everyone knows and understands? Why invent another meaning that doesn't directly relate to what the word actually means? And you hear people running around today, it's like, it drives me nuts. People say, oh, he's a child, he's under 18, a child under 18, child under 18. It's just bullshit. It's fabricated nonsense. It doesn't mean that, except in the context of the legal term under Title 18. Title 18 is an abomination. It is absolutely, unbelievably evil. And the congressmen and senators who passed it, Title 18 should be executed for treason and other crimes against humanity, because it's absolutely disgusting. And yet, people accept it without question, and they don't think about it. They don't try to figure out what's wrong with it. Or anything. Oh yeah, child means a minor, under 18. That's not true. Only in the context of the law, which is wrong. Not only wrong in its context as Title 18, the concept of Title 18 is an abomination. And it has there's no justification for that law existing in a free society. It's just absolutely, unbelievably stupid and disgusting, and criminal, and treason, etc. So, I hope that you begin to think a little bit about this now that I've given you a little example of how words are redefined and misdefined and misapplied under context and taken out of context, and the people are conditioned to accept that without question and say, oh yeah, that's what the word means. And it doesn't mean that. It never does, never has, never will. The word child means prepubescent in a biological human development stage, or an offspring, or the project is my child, my baby, which is a slang definition of the word. We need a definition of the word slang to understand what slang is. I'm sure if you look that up in the dictionary, it will tell you. I haven't done that. Should have and will, but I haven't done it yet. So now you have some understanding of how the government screws around with the language, the mind benders, I call them. They twist things and bend things in people's minds so that people start thinking, oh yeah, the word child means, a minor or someone under 18, when that's just total fabricated nonsense. The word person means a corporation. When the government says the word person, it means a corporation, because that's what the law says it means. It doesn't change the real meaning of the word. Just changes the meaning of the word as they use it in the context of that law, in this case the income tax. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So the word child is one of those. And people have fallen victim to that babble. They have allowed themselves to be manipulated and, let's just say brainwashed into believing that the word child means, someone under 18. That's just absolutely foolish of them. I would say stupid of them to allow that to happen to their brain and allow their brain to be jerked around like that by these assholes, these criminals, these criminally insane monsters. And to admit, I know it's difficult. People don't want to admit that they've been jerked around and duped. They don't want people to think that they're that gullible and naive, that they can be used and abused and jerked around by a government. It's embarrassing. I understand that. But that doesn't change the fact that you've been duped. You've allowed yourself to be duped. And you should redeem yourself by not being duped anymore. And coming to understand what the government and the mind benders and the matrix and the elitists and the people in charge of the world. And yeah, there are a few people in charge of the world, whether you want to believe that or not. Yeah. However, we need to examine these things and come to understand this reality. The words mean what they mean. You can't change the meaning of the word entirely. You can only change the meaning of the word for your specific purposes, like to pass a law and therefore create something that's out of thin air. The word child is one of those examples where it has been turned into babble by the law and the people who make laws. Monsters. Criminals, traitors, and psychopaths. Anyway, think about that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. I'll give you some examples like I did. I mentioned some other words like equal, which is totally misunderstood today. It doesn't mean what people think it means because they're confused and they've been brainwashed and manipulated and conditioned to believe things. It's like law enforcement is another phrase. Law enforcement. Law enforcement. What that means is the Gestapo. That's what they called the Gestapo. That's what they called the SS in Nazi Germany. Law enforcement. Do you want to live in a country where the title of your police people, the category that you put your police officers in, is called Gestapo? Because that's the definition of law enforcement if you were living in Nazi-era Germany. You get what I'm saying? You starting to understand what's going on? They're turning the language into babble. And you're allowing it to happen, and you're accepting that without question, and that's just unbelievably stupid of you. You shouldn't do that. If that's what you do. If you're like me, then you're not falling for that. But most people are gullible enough to believe nonsense. So, law enforcement is one of those terms that has been defined. And the original definition of the word law enforcement is Gestapo or Taliban, something like that. All right, another word, like I said, child. You've got law enforcement. You've got pedophile. Okay, pedophile does not mean a person who is sexually attracted to a minor. It doesn't mean someone who is sexually attracted to an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old. Or a 16-year-old, or any teenager for that matter, because that's not what the word means. If you look up the word pedophile and its origins, it means child lover, lover of children, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, who doesn't love children? I don't mean sexually, I mean emotionally. I love my children, that doesn't mean I want to have sex with them. So you understand what I'm saying? All right, I'm going to let you go and think about this for a while. I'll be back and we'll talk some more later. You have fun, enjoy, and see you next time.